Instead of looking at yet another AMD Ryzen gaming laptop, today I'll be checking out a brand new Intel laptop instead. So this is the MSI GF65 Thin, which is a very light and thin 15-inch gaming laptop that comes with a brand new Intel Core i7-10750H CPU. Now this CPU is pretty much like the previous generation CPUs, just with a bit higher clock speed. The MSI GF65 Thin is not that new either actually, and the previous models were always aimed at the affordable end of the market. Now I'm not sure what the pricing is going to be in the US and in the other regions, but here in the Netherlands, this particular model that comes with the Intel Core i7-10750H CPU, with a GTX 1660 Ti GPU, with 16 gigs of RAM, a 500 GB SSD, and 120 Hz IPS panel will cost you $1299 or 1,300 euros. So that's pretty much the same as the all AMD laptop I reviewed a few weeks back, the MSI Bravo 17, and in the same price range of the Asus G15 and A15 laptops, depending on their spec, of course. So let's see if Intel's latest and greatest mobile CPU can compete with the AMD Ryzen 4000 series mobile CPUs. And more importantly, let's see how this laptop performs and if it's worth considering if you're looking to buy an affordable laptop for gaming. Let's go! This video is brought to you by Cooler Master and their MM711 Ultra Light Gaming Mouse. With the top optical sensor, solid Omron switches, beautiful RGB and a weight of only 60 grams, the MM711 is a great mouse for serious gamers and all-around users alike. Check it out using the links in the description below. The outer design of the GF65 Thin isn't that different from the MSI Bravo series. It is fairly compact for a 15-inch laptop, as it's only about 2 centimeters high and it weighs a bit less than 2 kilos. So it's pretty much a bit lighter and more compact than the Asus TUF A15. There is brushed aluminum on top, which looks nice but does show fingerprints really quickly, so expect to clean this laptop frequently. Now the build quality is okay, it's pretty typical for this price range, but it's not amazing as there is a bit of flex here and there. The overall look is a bit old school as MSI decided to stick to red details again. I personally can't help but think it's a bit old-fashioned and would look much better and much more modern if they went with RGB theme or just black or white instead of red, but that is completely a subjective opinion. The hinge feels pretty good though, it is very easy to open with one hand and the display feels fairly sturdy. The inside has a metal layer as well, but it is actually quite thin. Now I know that a lot of you think that metal is always better than plastic, but I would personally rather have a bit sturdier plastic than a very thin sheet of metal. Now the choice of brushed metal also makes the inside show fingerprints very easily, and I have to say some of the edges are very sharp and should have been rounded a bit more. So overall quality and finish is pretty much typical for this price class, but in this particular area I would say the Asus TUF A15 simply did better. The keyboard of the GF65 is acceptable, the actuation feels alright, but the travel is a bit shorter. But it is really completely fine for gaming and typing. Also, the backlighting of the keyboard is only red. Now I think RGB would have been nicer, or again I think white would have made this look a bit more elegant and therefore more professional. Now the touchpad on this thing is an odd one. It is a precision model and the surface that MSI used is actually quite great. It is really smooth, the palm rejection is good, and it's overall nice to use for, pointing at stuff. I mean, it's a touchpad, you cannot really love a touchpad. But unfortunately, it does have a bit of a wobble, so both tapping and pressing the corners to click do feel a bit awkward. If they added dedicated buttons instead, that would be really great. Connectivity is pretty alright. On the left we have an HDMI port and the charger port, and on the right side there are two USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type-C ports and two USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type-A ports. There is an Ethernet connection and a combined audio jack. There is no Thunderbolt support or USB 3.2 Gen 2 connections, but considering the price of this laptop, I think it's really alright to assume that the buyers won't really spend big cash on the fastest external storage and are pretty much more concerned with having enough USB ports instead. Now, off to the performance, and considering the fact how well the AMD Ryzen CPUs did, it was interesting to see if Intel is going to reclaim their crown in this mobile segment. Now, unfortunately for Intel, it doesn't really look that good here. Only in the single-core Cinebench 15 graph, the 10750H manages to stay ahead of the Ryzen's, but in all other CPU benchmarks, including the much newer single-core Cinebench 20, the Ryzen CPUs are just ahead, and the jump from the 9th generation to the 10th gen of Intel CPUs is not that amazing either. Now, since these i7 CPUs are still 6 cores and the Ryzen 7 4800 models are 8 cores, in any multi-threaded benchmark, the new AMD options are just way ahead of Intel. So the question is, what does that mean for gamers? And actually, not that much. Looking at the Division 2, Far Cry 5 and Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which are all fairly CPU-heavy games, none of these new CPUs are limiting the GPUs. So both the GF65 with the GTX 1660 Ti, as well as the GS66 with the RTX 2060, are exactly where we should expect them to be. While the older Ryzen CPUs were clearly a bottleneck, it is not like that the new, more powerful AMD CPUs will suddenly make games run faster than the Intel rigs with the same GPU. So, Intel really isn't in any advantage or disadvantage here. So if all you do is game, you should just get the best GPU for your money, and this whole Intel versus AMD debate shouldn't really be something to stress about. But let's look at the battery life of this thing, because this is where the GF65 Thin does a decent job considering it's a gaming laptop. About 3.5 hours in the heavy PC Mark 8 is acceptable, and just over 5 hours of Netflix watching is not bad at all. It is considerably better than the MSI Bravo 17, which had a smaller battery so it could keep the 2.5-inch drive. But at the same time, it is considerably worse than both the Asus G15 and the 90 watt-hour TUF A15. And thermals and noise are also pretty much what we expect them to be, considering the specs of this laptop and the results. Like in every thin gaming laptop, the fans do have to work hard when running a CPU-heavy game. It is coming in at around 50 decibels in extreme performance mode, as the CPU gets around 95 degrees Celsius and the GPU around 85 degrees Celsius. Now, this is still within spec, although I do like to see the CPU staying closer or below 90 degrees myself. If you just run CPU-heavy tasks, the GF65 does look a bit more comfortable. The CPU stands around 84 degrees at 46 decibels. One thing I think that MSI could do is lower the fans a bit more for office use, because it's still pretty audible at 35 decibels in idle. Or just add a fan stop feature, for example, like I've seen on some other laptops. Let's take a look inside. The GF65 is really easy to open, and after removing the panel, you can see a lot of copper heat pipes, and you have access to all key components. You can easily clean the fans, replace the battery, upgrade the memory, or change out the network card. However, since this already has a Wi-Fi 6 chip, there is no reason to do so. Most importantly, you can add a second SSD as well, with the second slot taking both NVMe and SATA drives. One thing that is only so-so is the 120Hz IPS display. Now, it is a cheaper gaming panel that we've seen in other laptops as well, and it is better than having a 60Hz refresh rate panel, but still, the color gamut is barely mediocre, and the other results are also average at best. Now, the gamut percentage sounds worse than it actually looks in reality, and it's not something you have to worry about when watching Netflix or gaming, especially considering the other results, like contrast, are actually quite good. But you really cannot use this laptop for any serious video or photo editing. Now, surprisingly enough, the speakers on this laptop are actually pretty good. There isn't a lot of bass, but there is plenty of volume, and it's clear enough. You still shouldn't use it for gaming and get a proper headset instead, but it's pretty okay for watching a movie or a series or two. So that about covers it for the MSI GF65, and it's not really a super impressive laptop. It has an average build quality and finish, an okay keyboard and touchpad experience. It has an entry-level gaming display at best, and it has a decent battery life. But for me, it's really hard to get excited about the new Intel CPUs because they're barely faster than the previous generation, while the new AMD Ryzen mobile CPUs are just pure performance monsters. Nevertheless, the new Intel is still fast enough for most day-to-day tasks, and More importantly, it doesn't really hold the GPUs back, whether it's a GTX 1660 Ti or an RTX 2060, which means that in games, these laptops are going to be just as fast as other laptops with the same GPU. So it will all come down to pricing, and that's also a bit of a tricky issue because here in the Netherlands, this laptop with a GTX 1660 Ti and a 500 gigabyte SSD costs just as much as the Asus TUF A15 with an RTX 2060, 1TB SSD, faster CPU, bit nicer build quality, and a longer battery life. So that's a pretty easy decision to make, and I cannot objectively recommend anyone to buy this laptop over the A15. So in order to compete, MSI really needs to lower the price a lot and make this a cheaper option. Now, prices are really not set in stone and they do change over time, so if you do find this laptop for a very reasonable price in your region, it is still a nice and affordable gaming laptop to consider. Now, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments down below what you think about this laptop and about this review. Don't forget to subscribe, give me a thumbs up, and see you in the next one. Bye, guys.